Welcome to the Note Coach podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Culberg. I'm really looking forward to today's topic. Growth is not always up. And I find this fascinating because when I think about growth graphs or advertising and you see this like lovely little linear scale and it's like, here's the time and here's the effort and it goes always up this way. Or it's like this big like boom exponential thing, but then they never show the bust. Like sometimes when
Yeah.
there's a big exponential boom, there's a bust. So I'm welcoming Jeff Robertson and I'm interested to see where we go with this. So
Yeah.
Jeff, over to you. Growth is not always up. What's your
Yeah.
take on
No,
this?
thank you. I love just the way it flows, right? So, for me, I kind of just coined growth isn't always up. And I use it in personal development for one side, and then I used it for business development as well. And it came out of a workshop that I like to do with business owners and their team. And when you're looking inside, we're going to use business as kind of our marker right now because it's one of the easier ones for folks to kind of understand it. Is when you associate with business, you always look at that number and your dollar signs, your figures. This is our plan. This is our revenue. And not all businesses are these successful revenue generators. Some are barely skating by, and then you're also there's still businesses here in the States that will lean some of their struggles still back on just the economy coming out of COVID, right? So when I was looking at that, was even being a business owner myself and working through my own struggles during COVID, was I had this point in time one day when I was not happy with my revenues, and I was just really frustrated, and I was venting. I was venting to my wife, who uh, um, who catches the brunt of sometimes of the motivational speaker who doesn't always be motivated, right? Um,
100%.
yeah. She was like, maybe your marker is not maybe successful finances is not your marker. And I was like, so I kind of went back and I started looking at just where I had grew as a person and what the lives that I had impacted and the team that I had built and just all these little things, um, the vision and purpose that we had set. And then how we was living, regardless of what our revenue, we were really still executing on our vision and purpose and creating some of the best customer relationships and impact. I was in fitness in one of my businesses, and the number of people that we help just feel better and get their life back. When you run on tight margins and your cash flow is not over the top like some businesses are, you really learn cash flow management and you learn financial discipline. So when you look at the things I'm talking about, is I always give the example: if you have this small little green plant that's just barely coming out of the earth, and that's kind of our tree that's in growth, but then underneath that you just have this root structure and it just keeps growing, and those roots are just digging deeper in the ground. So you kind of visualizing all the things that I just mentioned, along with just being adaptable and innovative. And we learned that during our pandemic here, was if our business, I was a fitness owner, they shut gyms down in my state. As I said yesterday, they opened liquor stores longer and shut fitness down, right? So
It was exactly the same here. It was a lot of people commenting, yes.
yeah, yeah. So the root, just the ability to adapt and still be in business, um, and all along while building this strong team and really honing in my leadership skills, and just that really gave me a picture, and it's that root structure that we was able to build in business. So I got to like thinking, all right, why did I get here? How did I get here? Right. And it takes me way back to just, growing up as a kid and kind of what defined me and, the structure that I was in or the situation I was in. Um, and as I went through all that stuff on the business side of all those markers of good roots, was like on the personal side is I discovered that failure is the best teacher. And even in that root structure, when you're looking at your root structure, is if you sit down and you go back and you start figuring out, if you look at your successes, I'll guarantee you there's some deep roots in failure. And when you start finding your successes, when your successful moments, you find that failure has probably been in your life a lot. I coach business now, work with helping build better teams, and I always kind of tell everyone, I didn't get here because I got it right. I'm here because of a lot of failures and a lot of setbacks and things that I had to learn to be resilient with, right? Um, and then in life and in business, your root structures over here for your business, and then we're focusing on our personal side. Is failures are your best teachers, and then progress comes in phases. So if you approach like starting a gym routine or whatever that might be for you, just in your personal life, is thinking about how, if you go back and look, you know, if you're trying to lose 20 pounds, you didn't do that just like right off the bat. It took you maybe 20 weeks, and for some folks, when you're learning a routine, it may have took you 6 months or, half a year just to dial in everything. So that just focusing on the fact in your root structures that progress is going to come in phases. And then kind of the third thing that I had seen with that was how much growth I had in my ability to step outside my comfort zone. It's just taking on in an area that is totally uncomfortable for you. Taking on a new challenge, learning a new skill, challenging yourself to do new things, and just creating some uncomfortableness in your life. And I think it's probably it pays. It really helps set you up for. We don't struggle like our you go back 30, 40, 50 years. I grew up in a time like I distinctly remember I never went to bed hungry, but I remember not having running water inside of my grandmother's house. Um, no one today, that I know of. It still happens, right, in our rural areas and in some of the other places. But now there's kids going to bed hungry. It's still, but like just infrastructure and things along like that is that struggle. So is when you look at your growth's not always up, is figuring out some struggles that you can bring into your life that you can control really helps through that suffering phase or that growth phase of where you're uncomfortable. And I think where that leads you is this powerful moment of self-reflection, which is where this root structure and all the things come from. And her conversation, the wife's conversation with me was is really just realizing through that process of where I had become, where I'm at. And then I started thinking about, like, I'm not this big old tree, but man, I tell you what, I'm a pretty bush right now. I've grown this, I ain't grown this big, but I've really laid in some amazing root structure here that'll help foster that, right? And
You've raised a lot of good points. I'm going to interrupt you there before I lose my
yeah,
train of thought.
yeah, go ahead,
One of the
please.
things that you spoke about was, like the finances. So
Yeah,
many people, if you go into business for yourself and you've come from corporate or traditional employment where you have the 9 to 5 and you get paid, a check or a salary, and then you on your own, as you said, one of the things I think that we don't factor in, so say we're not quite making as much or we're making the same, there's what about the time freedom? So like as an entrepreneur,
yeah,
what I love is I have 2 young children. They're in grade 3 and 6 at school. And like we're recording this on a Thursday, my time. So tomorrow's Friday. My daughter
yeah.
has AFL, Aussie Rules Football, for anyone. My daughter is also a cheerleader and she's a footy player. So that's a whole thing.
That's
Um,
tough.
and my son has an assembly where they're presenting an item. So he's written a poem. I
Yeah,
have structured my workday so that I can attend both of those events on a weekday in a traditional 9 to 5. So sometimes I think, when you think, oh, my business isn't growing as much as I hoped, or, the bottom line or the dollars aren't increasing, your growth isn't always up. What else do you have? When I worked in a corporate job, I couldn't walk off in the middle of the day and go out to my kids' AFL match or go to my kids'
yeah.
assembly. I'd need to apply to have an annual leave day, and then that would take out of my allotment for the year. And then my kids have lots of things. So then do I actually get a break if I'm taking one day haphazard here and there? So like actually having the freedom that you need to safeguard and put in place, because entrepreneurs often leave the 9 to 5 to work 24/7, which is why I
Yeah.
teach boundaries and do these kind of things that I do.
Yeah.
But the time freedom and flexibility, for me, is worth less dollars personally, because I get to be present with my children. Whereas if I worked in a corporate job where potentially I could earn significantly more, but my kids would go to before school care, after school care, weekend care, holiday care. And I'm not judging people who do that, like you do you, but I really wanted to be able to go to these things. It was very important to me, because growing up, my parents never were able to attend. I was the kid who went to all the care, and they did the best they could with what they had, but I consciously chose something different. And I think sometimes, whenever I'm having the money thing, because I think it's normal, it's just taboo to talk about. We all have money things, especially currently, to think about, well, what else does your business afford you that you wouldn't have if you were doing something else? So that's the first point. And the second point, when you said progress is in phases, I think we forget that. Like, I love your gym example. I'm going to drop 20 pounds, or I'm going to gain some strength to be able to do this. We know that it's not a pound a week over 20 weeks. There could be a week where you lose nothing. And then, like, I released 171 pounds a few years ago. And I could tell you there were weeks where there was nothing or even a gain, and then weeks where 7 pounds or something would drop. It was just, but you're looking at the big picture. But the other thing too, as you're getting fit, like I said, my daughter's a cheerleader and an AFL player. It's weird, but she rocks it. She competes competitive cheerleading, and there was this one stunt and they couldn't get it. And they tried it every week, Jeff, and they couldn't get it. And they're like, we're about to compete and we can't lift the pyramid. And I was like, you just do the best you can. And she's crying because she's not strong enough to lift. And I'm sure the other girl's crying because she thinks she's too heavy to lift. And I'm like, at the end of the day, you are both doing the best you can. Whether you do it or not, it doesn't matter. Their last trial, like practice training, was the Thursday. They competed on the Friday night. They nailed it on the Thursday and they got in the competition. They didn't win, but they still placed. But whether they had or not, I think sometimes when you say progress is in phases, it can be failure and failure and failure. Like every week, we can't nail it, we can't lift, we can't do it. And then they've got it. And it's just kind of like the tracks are all aligned and then the skill is there. And they still have fumbles, but once you've got it, you've got it. But there's a lot of nothing until there's something. It's kind of like pregnancy. You're not pregnant until you're pregnant. There's no partially pregnant. So I think when you look at failure and you just keep seeing, I'm failing, I'm failing, I'm failing, until you're not. So, and then even then you have your movement, but then something else. Because as soon as you do the next thing, you make your next thing in business, you have your next success, there's something else you're going to want. So if you're always looking at, oh, I'm not enough, then you're going to find a lot of evidence for that.
I think the example I use with you, you're spot on with both of these. The point I would make on the parenting, you're absolutely right. Like I was working 7 days a week for W-2 in the States. I'm working as an employee. And losing my time. My kids were growing up without me being present. That was my deciding factor. And I live the same life that you do now. That's one of my growth is not always ups. And what I'll example is when I'm working with a business owner that is struggling like to find that work home balance, which is you to be where you are, is I'll ask them like, hey, what is your hourly rate? When you're somewhere, and they're like, oh, it's this or it's that. And then I'm like, what's your hourly rate at home? What's your hourly rate with your kids? And they can't. And they're like, oh, I can't put a price on them. Then why are you? Why you can't put a price. So the time you're spending there is priceless. So let's figure out a way that we can help create a better team, communication, all those things, right? And to your point with your daughter, and what I would say that progress comes in phases, and I see that coaching kids as well and working with them, and even my own kids, 15 and 12, very competitive. Same, we do a lot of sports. Is once they get that on that pyramid, you got to do it again. That's not winning. You got to go back and you got to win every day. And if you lose, you got to learn from it. If you win, you got to learn from it. Celebrate it and do it again. Do it again. And that's just that's sports. I watch a lot of people that nail that and then they walk off and they're like, oh, I'm done. I'll never be able to do this again. I'm like, no, you got to do it. Keep doing it. Keep doing it.
And I think that's such a great point. So like I wrote an article that came out in a magazine recently. It was the courage to have a go. So as I said, she competes 4 times a year. And in the last competition, her club sent a team to the Worlds that finished third. So my daughter's not in that team yet. She might be one day, but they are breathtaking to watch. And then they made a little fumble and she was so hard on herself. And, to your piece and what you do with working with people with grit and resilience, there was another team, and as they ran out on the stage, this poor girl, I felt so bad for her. She tripped and she just landed on her butt as the team ran out. But she got back up, she kept going. Then when she did the pyramid, she dropped the person, not injured, like they didn't have to call an ambulance. I've seen that happen too.
Yeah.
But as in like that stunt would have got no points. And then when she went to do a cartwheel, she somehow slipped and ended up really heavily on her hip. And that was the team that had my attention more than any others, more than the flawless world championship team, more than my own kids' team. Like, I'm not going to be, I'm honest, not that mum who's like my kid, whatever. And I said, whether or not you won, whether or not you were flawless, I would be so proud if that was my kid because she
Yeah.
kept going. Like, how many people would be like, oh my God, I'm humiliated, run off. At the end, she did cry. I saw her run to the side and cry, and I just wanted to give her a hug. Didn't know her from Adam. Don't worry, we'll
No.
touch someone else's kid. Don't panic. But I was just like, the fact that she did it, she stayed all the way through 3 giant blunders to a room of 1,000 that's also being live streamed, and the resilience to keep going. And I think sometimes in business, you launch a program or you start a course or you do something and you get no signups, or I think it's personally worse if you get one.
Yeah.
I've had this debate with a lot of people. I'm like, if you get none, you can just kind of like go back to the drawing board, start again. But if you get like 1 or 2, then you need to be really honest. Is it going to be worth this? Because often if you're running a group, you have minimum viability. So do you say to the people, I'm always honest. I'm like, I needed this many to run it. Here are your options, refund, give them something, whatever. But to me, it's harder to get not make minimum numbers than to actually get none. But then it's kind of like, instead of labeling yourself as a failure or a success, if it does work, as you said, you nail the pyramid once, you got to keep doing it. You nail your program once, and you might have in the back of your mind, oh, next time it's just going to sell out. And then it doesn't. And it's like, what happened here? Last time I sold 50 places and this time I sold 6. Ask me how I know. Um, what happened? And I think it's always that keep showing up and keep, having that progress in phases and not getting like resting on your laurels, not grinding and hustle. I don't subscribe to that at all, but
Yeah.
not thinking that just because it worked once, it's always going to work that way.
Resilience is built in the struggles, right? And when they're that age, and I had the opportunity to screw this up. We spend a lot of money, and in the States we do a lot of travel sports, and it's expensive, and so your expectations are a little higher for the competition and all. But here's what I tell my kids: is like, go fail. We're playing a long game. I need you to make every. I don't care if it's in a game. What I want you to do your best. I don't want you goofing off. But if you make a mistake, put it behind you. Move on. We're playing. I want. We're playing the long game. And as long as it's worth the money we're spending for you to learn how to fail, for you to fail in a safe space, and then, then once you learn how to lose, you really start learning how to win. And once you learn how to win, man, it's becomes unstoppable, and you learn that competition. Um, yeah, it's
That's the
good
thing
stuff.
too. Sometimes if things come easy to you, like my daughter is gifted. She's made what's called a selective school for high school next year, so it's based on their academia. She's never had to study. Like she just gets things. And my
Yeah,
son is on the spectrum and he struggles a lot. Like reading, he'd be crying and I'd be crying, and it was COVID, so I'd be on the phone to teacher and she's like happy but all these things. But in the long run, the skill and resilience and grit he's determined, like when he wants something, to keep going, as opposed to someone who's always had stuff kind of come easy to them. That's why the
yeah,
cheer's been good for her, because it's like, oh wow, I'm not instantly good at something. I actually have to try. And I was a straight A student at school, so I went through school and never had a struggle. Then I went to medical school and went from being the smartest to just average. It's like, shit, this
yeah.
is a shell shock moment, because I actually have to study at something, and it sounds so like, I don't know, elitist or whatever. But sometimes when business or something's, you've gotten a job because somebody's recommended something, and then, that job's ended and suddenly you've got to put a CV together or a resume, and you've never had to do that. Like there's all sorts of situations in life where we haven't realized our privilege until we're in a situation when we no longer have it. And then, that resilience to keep going when all signs are pointing out. Like, did you ever hear the story? I don't know how much of it's true, but of Walt Disney when he was first making Disneyland?
Maybe. Remind.
Apparently, he was turned down by 30 banks because he needed the loan. Like, he didn't have the money. Like, you need capital depending on what your business
Yeah,
is. And I'm thinking, imagine the wherewithal to put your suit on and have your proposal together and walk into the bank when 29 other times you've been like, sorry, we're not going to fund you. Most people give up after 2 and 3, not
Oh yeah.
30. Or when you think of J.K. Rowling, I know she's has other things going on, but the fact that she put the Harry Potter manuscript into like 26 publishers who are all like, yeah, no, we're not taking this weird book on. And now it's a international global
Oh
sensation with
yeah.
a movie franchise and a TV show coming. And I think these are,
Amusement parks, right? They're just
yes, that's
yeah.
true. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. We look at the success now, and it's like, well, I want to be like that. And it's like, are you willing to do all this nose and doors in your face for the first however long until it starts to get momentum?
I always teach my clients. Fitness was easy to say this because you're selling a result, right? You're selling ultimately in fitness. You sell a result. We try to change that around where you're selling the feeling, and emotion, some of the stuff. But at the end, people just want to look good. They want to feel good. And when it starts to get tough in that workout, same thing in life, to speak what you did, is everybody wants the outcome, but are you willing to do what it takes to get there? That's when people quit because it's tough. And then when people come like, Jeff, I want to start my own business. I want to do this. I want to do that. I'm like, okay, where are you at financially? And they're like, well, I'm here. I've got this. I'm like, or I need this, or I'm going to pay myself. I'm going to do this. I'm like, listen, business is tough. I want to help you, right? I'll guide you, but let's have a plan. Let's folks. And I've had some pretty cool jobs. I got to do some undercover police work at a point in time. And when you do that, like everybody wants to do what you do. And I've talked to people who's like, they didn't realize how harder it was. And I've also, the other example I use is everybody wants to score that touchdown in the NFL in the States is football, right? Um, until that 500-pound linebacker or that 500-pound tackle is chasing you down the field just as fast as you're running, right? So you're exactly right. I think we don't. You always see the outcome. You see the picture, you see the trophy, you see the skill, but you never see the preparation that goes into those moments. Your daughter, your son's just academics, right? The work that he has to put in that's extra, and even yourself was things may have come easier to you, but if someone on the outside was probably telling you like, no, you worked your butt off to stay there because you wanted it more than the person next to you. I've seen
Yeah, I
that a
think
lot.
that's a point too. That's such a great point. Like, how much do you want it?
Yeah.
Because sometimes people want the outcome. As you said, you want the trophy or you want the social media followers. You want, like, there's this show here called Married at First Sight. I'm not proud to say that I watch it because it's total trash, but sometimes you just go turn your brain off. And in the last season that showed,
It's
there
good
was
to
like,
see how other people live, right?
well, what happened was all these people were complaining, like from the show, because that season kind of tanked. And they're like, I
Yeah,
haven't got enough followers to be an influencer. And I'm like, so you went on this show for love, because you wanted to
yeah,
become an influencer. And now you've got to actually go back to working for a living. Like, oh, poor you. Like, you want the fast track. And it's like, you have to put the effort in. Like, my daughter's really good at AFL. She's in the backyard every day. We've got a trampoline. We put it up on the side, and she literally is handballing the ball into the trampoline so it bounces back to her so she can do it again, because after like 10, 15 minutes, I've had enough. And also, our yard isn't big enough for the kicking. So every afternoon, she'll be like, can we go down to the field? So walk down to the field so she can practice kicking. And then she'll meet other kids. And she's quite rough and tumble. As I said, it's so funny to watch her because cheerleading all done up and then rough and tumble with the mouth guard.
that's
And
awesome.
but,
We live in a neighborhood as well. I have an old tractor tire where our kids swing the bats into, and then when I have
yes.
sledgehammers, we work out with them. Saying you'll hear my kids out there
Yes,
hitting that
yes. You could
tire.
be like, oh,
Saying
she's out there. Sometimes she can't do it when I'm recording because the constant ding. My mic's good. It
yes,
doesn't pick it up, but I
yeah,
lose my train of thought because of the thwack, thwack, you
yeah,
know? But I'm thinking we don't see that. Like, you see the private jets or the laptop lifestyle, which
yeah,
I always question, like how much of these are actually real photos? Because if you ever tried to use a laptop in pure sunlight, you can't see shit. You need one of
yeah.
those things that goes around the outside. So when I see that little ET type box, I'm like, yeah, they're actually using that laptop. But sometimes, as you said, we want the outcome, but not the effort that goes behind it. And what do they always say? That's the overnight success that was like 20 years in the making. Like, even
Yeah.
some bands, I think it was the Beatles, I can't remember. It was they had a hit song, but then they had like nothing for a year. So they were technically a one-hit wonder, but then kept it and then become global. I think ABBA or another band was very
Yeah.
similar too. And
But
we,
I tell people when they talk about he's just a one hit wonder, and I'm like, he made it a little further than we did, or she. Right? That's
that's
to be a one hit wonder, to have your, and that's a like we discount that. I hear that all the time. We're like, oh yeah, he's just a this that and the other. You're like, he's a little bit, yeah, he's made it further than me. And we don't we also take away from that. That's a
yeah.
big deal. That's a really big freaking deal just to have that.
What's like that song Gangnam Style? It was like a
Yeah,
global sensation. My kids both love it. I mean, you look up on YouTube and it has like I think it's the biggest watched or used to be the biggest watched YouTube. And they're like, but he never did another. I'm like, oh, he did a couple others, but sometimes it doesn't take off. But you can then, depending on what it is, build your life off royalties or whatever. Like the
yeah,
kid from Harry Potter, who played Ron, I can't remember his name, but he's basically never worked again. He hasn't wanted to. He's like, I made enough money from this thing. I bought an ice cream truck, which is what I wanted to do. And I think sometimes, some people will stay in the game and they'll continue to do things, but other people, like, back to your point, how much is your time with your family or whatever
yeah,
worth? Is it, priceless? And sometimes, because I do lots of free things, I have this podcast, I have a newsletter, and I have some lower level paid things. But then to work one on one with me is, a higher level price. And people will be like, well, I don't want to pay that. You don't have to. But like to work for less, I'd rather buy the hour back myself to spend with my family
yeah,
than to work for something that doesn't feel like a fair energetic exchange to me. Because if you want to just pick my brain or whatever, I've got hundreds of hours of free stuff. How about
yeah.
it?
I think people miss that too. Is I'm where I am because of all the decisions I made, and it's easy to say, I wouldn't do this over again because I wouldn't be where I'm at. I could easily, I would probably, there's a few things. I don't know that I would change a lot, but I would approach some things differently maybe. But where I was going with that is when people don't want to pay you, when you're where they're trying to get, you hold that information. It's that exchange that can help them get to where they're going. That's worth your lifetime. To be able to, if you're holding the information and you say, hey, it's going to cost me $1,000 to work with me for this amount of time, but at the end of that, these are the things that you're going to accomplish. I tell people this all the time: turn it around, all right, and then look how long it's going to take you to figure this out on your own. It drives me nuts because I do this, like what I tell you again. I do this because I didn't get it right. I was like, I'll figure out how to work out on my own. I'm a smart person. I'll figure out my nutrition. I'll Google it. It set me back 5 years. Business stuff. If I was fortunate enough to really understand coaching by the time I rolled into business, the first people I joined masterminds, I hired coaches, all these things. I got into right groups and paid to be in these groups. The free groups are good, but they want to convert you to being paid. And your value is in those paid groups around in your network and people that have done their costs. Here's what you're paying for. You're paying for their value and the time and for their sweat equity that they've learned this from. So
Yeah,
don't
I've heard.
discount that. If you're wanting to sign up with with either one of us, man, don't take that for granted. It's worth every penny.
I think that's such a great point. I've heard someone say like your network is your net worth, but
Yeah,
you're not just paying for the thing. But like for example, Jeff and I met on a platform called Podmatch, which I've only been on about 3 months. I'm not sure how long have you been with it for.
about the same. Yeah,
Yeah, and this show's 420, 30. I don't know how many episodes. A lot of episodes. And in the beginning, I was a little bit hesitant to join a platform I had to pay for. I will be honest, because
yeah,
I'm like, I have so
same.
many guests pitching me. I pitch podcasts. Why would I pay? Like, like I'm not saying go freely throw money at everything, but I was a little bit hesitant. But then I joined because and it kept coming up. And long story short, I exclusively take guests through Podmatch now. It's only been 3 months. And some people will say to me, I don't want to pay. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to, you do you. I've got enough guests coming in. But also for me as a host, I have Jeff's photos, his links,
Yeah.
his topic titles, the questions to ask him. It's all there in one click. Then we book the time. I know what time he's on. It saves me hours. Like
Oh
I don't
my
need
good.
to
Yeah,
email back and forth and say, what do you want to talk about? What day? Where's your photos? Where's your tagline? Like it's just And I also have a guest profile like yourself. I'm a host and a guest on the platform. And I just find the number of hours, and also as a guest, all the things on the profile are looking for podcast guests. So it saves me time. Whereas if
Absolutely.
I'm just Googling, going through Apple Podcasts and looking, like some shows, when I pitch them or whatever, they only ever take their clients. So it's like, well, now I've got to pay you to be on the show. Or some shows charge, and Podmatch does have that sometimes. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but it comes
Yeah.
up and
All
lets
right.
you
Yeah.
know as a little message. This, and I'm
Yeah.
like, well, no, I'm not paying any extra. But I was like, sometimes I hate the term when I hear it pay to play because sometimes it sounds quite elitist, but
Yeah.
it's like you're paying for a this concise, cohesive space, as opposed to there are free groups out there. There's tons of free go on a podcast groups with 65,000 members, and then you get lost amongst the sea, or you say you want to be on it, and then they don't show up. Like if anyone, I've only had one guest in this 3 months who didn't show up. I can just report it with one click on Podmatch. And then in future, if you book someone, it'll be like, this guest has an X no-show rate. For me, it will immediately be no thanks, next. So the convenience, the time saving, the fact, and I think with anything, um, you get what you pay
It's
for
like
is
having
such
an
a
assistant.
cliche.
It's like having a virtual assistant or an assistant that does all the work for you. The people it match people message me like, hey, I'd like to be on your platform. I can read their bio, and some people like I just admire what I do doesn't line up with what they do, and I just you can pass on them like, hey, revisit me. I think I'm out till February right now, booking wise, so I can, but it helps create a conversation, and you're a little more than in sales and marketing we always teach about warming up our audience and cold audience. If you're on that platform, you're there because you're trying to accomplish something through conversation, whether it's branding, getting your word out on your book. I had Susan Snow on, um, and her father was ambushed and killed in 1985. He's the LAPD officer. I would have never Me and her would have never connected if it hadn't have been for that platform. Same thing with you. Just an amazing, and you're right, is it's worth every penny because I'm saving time. It
Yeah, well,
doesn't
that's the
work
other
for me.
thing too that I tell people. I'm like, at one stage, I hired an agency to book me on
Yeah.
podcasts, and I'm not opposed to that. That cost me 50 an episode. On Podmatch, it costs 29 a month. And
Yeah.
if you're keen at it, like I had one of my clients join it, she booked 10 episodes in 24 hours, Jeff. I was like, you're a machine. How many people did you message? But like but also like anything, you get out what you put into it. I had another person join and she's like, well, nothing really happened. And I was like, so were you searching? Were you messaging? Were you looking at your matches? And she's like, I thought they would just kind of come to me. And I think, to your point, we kind of want the success, but sometimes people message, but sometimes it's kind of like that exchange and all these sorts of things. But I
You
think,
got to do something, right? You got to do if you're taking like a little bit of effort, and after you get some episodes, um, I'm going to tell everyone, hey, you should go be on this podcast, right? I'm going to tell them during my things like, hey, what do you got next? Like, hey, make sure you book. We'll refer each other because the conversations are good.
yes, I think that's
Right?
the networking with other
Yeah.
podcasters, guests, and hosts is what's so often overlooked. Like I had a lady on my show 2 weeks ago called Wendy, and then a couple of days later I had this lady called Andy, and I was like, oh my gosh! So I like introduced them, and now they're recording something else together. And I think we forget that because sometimes people get stuck on downloads and numbers and stats and listens and views and all things that are vanity. But you forget more than anything, podcasting is like human to human. And then other people it's like, a fly on the wall of other people's conversation, literally what it is in an interview based podcast.
I had a lady yesterday. I was on her platform, and she was coming out with some stuff, and she's like, I'm leadership, and I'm gonna have a little book that kind of takes away clips from the episodes, and really great idea of how she wanted to use her content.
Oh,
And
is
she,
that Vicky something or other?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was on
and
her
she was,
podcast last week and she was telling me about the
yeah,
book thing.
yeah. But I had a friend. I messed her name up because she's New Jersey and I'm from the South, but Shayna Francesca was on my podcast. Women's leadership teaches from a totally different perspective. And Vicky was like, I'm working on this and I really need to dial in some more women's leadership. And I was like, whoa, hold on here. Yeah, have you talked to this lady? And she's like, yeah, but it's been a while. And so anyway, she's going to reconnect with her to revisit the conversation because she's like, I wasn't doing this then. I'm like, yeah, you should. Same thing. Just good. I teach this part of a lot of stuff I do. I'll teach it's 2 R's. And if you'll cover both of these, you'll be successful in life and business. If you'll protect your relationships, if you'll create and protect your relationships and your reputation, show up on time, be where you're supposed to be, do what you're, have a good, do it, just deliver. If you'll do those two R's in anything you do in business, reputation and relationships, you'll go far.
Yeah. And I think that's such a point. And it's such a great example. Like, and it's funny how they just kind of turn up. As in, you're having this
Yeah.
conversation and you meet someone else, like, oh, have you met this person? And then you've also got that kind of more established know, like, trust, or it's faster because it's become on a recommendation of somebody, who knows someone else. So this has been incredible, Jeff. So let the listeners know
Okay.
what it is that you do and where they can find you.
Well, I'm a business resilient coach, and I help either personal development or leadership development, but I would like to focus on teams for businesses that are developing a new team, working on just working on, here's one of my ideal clients is a business owner who's had his first couple hires, and there's a little bit of friction because a business owner is very direct in how they do things, and then I just kind of use DISC and some of the other tools, and then working through growth not always up, of just helping set expectations of where they can grow as a company together, so helping them plant some good roots. That's probably one of the things I enjoy the most. And secondly, behind that, in is I do motivational speaking and just tell a story of my life. But I'm available for any kind of business coaching, workshops, marketing. I have a background in a little bit of everything that I'm able to just kind of tailor that workshop or speaking engagement to your audience. And you can, if you go over to Jeffrey Robertson's, my full name, jeffreyrobertson.com. That's where my website is, obviously. And then you can find, I'm active on Instagram. It's kind of where I like to spend my time. And it's my handle there is at Jeff. And it's a fast way of saying my last name. It's Rabason. So it's Jeff
Ah,
Robertson on Instagram. Robertson was taken, so it's hard to get your name. So, but if you go to my website, you'll find all my social links. But if you want to message me and connect with me, if you message me through Instagram, that's going to be me. And I love hearing from you. If it's anything I can do to help you succeed personally, or professionally and through your team or business, be sure to reach out for me. I love to help.
2 questions before we wrap up. With the
Yeah,
DISC profile, for anyone listening who's unaware, it's like a personality profiling system.
yeah.
Do they need to know their DISC, or do you do that as part of working with them?
No, we do that for them. I have a training curriculum that we do. We try to, if I'm coming on site to your business, or if we're going to do it on Zoom, I have everything done ahead of time, and we kind of reveal your personality during the training, so it helps you kind of just grasp, and we work through the different personality styles, and then how they work together, how they can work apart, and then how you can use those. And the whole goal at the end of the training is for you to learn how to be a chameleon. And I'm going to talk to Susan the way that she needs to be talked to, and not how I want to talk to her. It just helps our quality of conversation. If you're listening to this podcast, we've both done it today. We're both talkers. We're both in that little I or parrot is the program I teach, where we enjoy the conversation, we enjoy talking. And so I have to know, like, don't talk over Susan. Susan has to not talk over me. And that's just the way that is. What was the other question?
Oh no, I was going to say that's really cool, especially, well, not a question so much as a statement or summary.
Yeah.
I loved how you said for businesses who've had their first couple of hires, because I think, when you start your business and you get to the point where it's beyond you and you need to outsource, sometimes it can be like, your business is your baby, or you can be a little bit
Yeah.
protective, and then different personalities coming in. And I love how you bring the DISC profile into that, because if you're really strong in this aspect and they're strong in that aspect, it can be like sometimes you think that they're not listening or they don't understand you, but you're just communicating differently. So I think that was just
Some
a
some
second
business
point.
owners uh, some business owners have a hard time taking their vision, right? Because they're guarded. They have a hard time. They get mad at their staff because they don't see what they see. And I help the business owner learn how to communicate their vision and get comfortable in working on just where they're headed, so the rest of the team can help them get there. A lot of business owners don't. They're like, they should already know because I'm here and sitting here on this podcast. They should already know why I'm here. I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. You have to tell
I know early on, the first, I don't know how many like VA
them.
support people, website people I hired, I was like, they just don't get me or whatever. And then over time, it was like, yeah, oh, how well was I not communicating? Because you just kind of expect that they just get it, or
Yeah.
you say it once, and it's like, it
Yeah.
makes sense to me. And then to someone else, it's like, especially, yeah. So I love that. And that will keep in the back of my mind for people I can send your way. Because, yeah, that is a really important point as you start to expand so that
Yeah.
everybody in the team is on the same page or at least in the same book.
It costs so listen, it costs so much to hire someone. You got if you got an employee that you have went, even if you just go through the interview process and they last a week, you've lost in time and effort, you lost a couple $1,000s, much less they stay for 6 months and don't work out. So
Yeah. No, well, I
that's
worked
a
in a call center for quite some time, about nearly 8 years. And when they bring in groups of people, usually about 20, they said that there'd be 1 to 2 who would last 12 months. And I was like, that is so much money on
yeah,
onboarding and training, and they'd lose an average of 2 to 3 before the 2 week training block even finished. They knew
yeah,
this and they built it into their stats, but it was like that's a lot of money on the table because bringing on somebody, onboarding them, training them, getting them takes time, energy, and money, like all three currencies.
yeah,
So yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff. Thank you everyone for
yeah.
listening. Catch you on the next one. Bye for now.